Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Clementine Starling, Director of the Forward Defence Programme here at the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Centre for Strategy and Security. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural Arsenals of Democracy Address, a rebranded series which hosts government leaders who steward defence industrial capabilities to discuss issues arising at the intersection of defence ministries and the industries which serve them. Today's event, Air Force Acquisition Priorities 2024, features the Honourable Andrew Hunter, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology and Logistics, who's here to deliver prepared remarks and have a conversation with us about how the Air Force is working to field next-generation technologies. I'd like to thank Andrew and you all, our audience, for joining us today for this timely discussion. Putting this event and the new series in context, I would like to underscore who we are. The Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Centre for Strategy and Security works to develop sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and its allies and partners. The Scowcroft Centre honours the legacy of service of General Brent Scowcroft and embodies his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security, support for US leadership in cooperation with allies and partners, and dedication to the mentorship of the next generation of leaders. Within the Scowcroft Centre, the programme which I lead, Forward Defence, generates ideas and connects stakeholders in the defence ecosystem to promote an enduring military advantage for the United States, its allies and partners. Our work identifies the defence strategies, capabilities, and resources the United States needs to deter and, if necessary, prevail in future conflict. This afternoon's event exemplifies one of the ways we deliver on this mission. The Air Force is currently undergoing a significant transformation, prioritizing speed in its acquisition plans to respond to a changing threat environment and new emerging technologies. This re-optimization effort, announced by Secretary of the Air Force Frank Kendall, is described as a strategic pivot in the department's acquisition approach to ensure the rapid fielding of new capabilities. This approach is guided by the 2022 National Defense Strategy, which emphasizes innovation, rapid technological advancement, and the recruitment of a highly skilled workforce to maintain US strategic and operational advantages over its competitors. The Air Force is moving forward ambitiously to field next-generation platforms like the Long-Range Strike Bomber and collaborative combat aircraft, while also working to more quickly adopt advanced software and digital services. The rapid procurement of leading-edge technology to support US defense efforts is something we spend a lot of time thinking about in the Forward Defense Program. It was the focus of our recently released Commission on Innovation Adoption final report, which determined that while the US is a world leader in innovation, it has an innovation adoption problem. Our commission laid out actionable recommendations for the military services, DoD, and the Congress to consider to improve the rapid acquisition of technology. And I'm pleased to say this work will continue with our new commission on software-defined warfare this year. In that context, we are excited to welcome to the Atlantic Council Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, the Honourable Andrew Hunter, who will tell us about the Air Force's acquisition vision for 2024 and beyond. In his role as Assistant Secretary, Mr. Hunter oversees Air Force research, development, and acquisition activities for over 550 acquisition programs. He also serves as the Principal Advisor to the Secretary of the Air Force and the Air Force Chief of Staff for research and development, test, production, and modernization efforts. Mr. Hunter previously served in the Obama administration as the Director of the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell, where he led efforts to quickly field intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities and developed innovative solutions to neutralizing chemical weapons. Following that appointment, Mr. Hunter is the Director of the Defense Industrial Initiatives Group at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And earlier in his career, Mr. Hunter was a professional staff member of the House Armed Services Committee. Quite a career. As a thought leader, he has written on artificial intelligence and national security, defense investment, and low-cost access to space, just to name a few topics. So following his opening remarks, Mr. Hunter will join Atlantic Council Senior Fellow Stephen Grunman the director of our Arsenals of Democracy project and producer of this event, Pre-Moderated Conversation. Before turning things over to Assistant Secretary Hunter, I would like to remind everyone that this event is public and on the record. We really encourage our online audience to visit askac.org to submit your questions to our moderator. Be sure to identify yourself and your affiliation, and we'll collect those questions throughout the event, and Steve will pose some of them to Mr. Hunter. For our in-person audience, you may ask your questions directly using the microphones in our studio. Once we begin the Q&A portion, please queue up behind the microphones in the aisle, and we will also encourage our online audience to follow the conversation on X using @ACScowcroft and the hashtag #4Defense. Without further ado, thank you all for joining us, and Assistant Secretary Hunter, thank you.
Well, thank you, Clementine, and thank you, Steve, for moderating and hosting and organizing this event. And it really is an honor to be here at the Scowcroft Center. I had very limited opportunity to interact with General Scowcroft directly, but certainly many of my mentors and employers over the years spent a lot of quality time with him, and he is, of course, one of the most remarkable figures in U.S. national security and thinkers and doers and actors. So it's great to be here. Great to be here at the Atlantic Council. I appreciate the invitation. And I do want to talk about exactly the things that Clementine previewed, the Air Force initiatives that are currently underway. Two closely related ones in particular, our focus on a discrete set of operational imperatives that we believe are necessary and are driven directly from our national defense strategy and the missions that it assigns to the Department of the Air Force, which includes both the United States Air Force, United States Space Force. I'll focus mostly on the Air Force because I have a colleague who manages our Space Force programs. But the strategy, of course, they're closely related. Their activities and our capabilities are closely related, and we work in close concert to deliver on the capabilities that we believe are implied and necessary to fulfill the missions under the National Defense Strategy. And so our Operational Imperatives Initiative has been out there for some time, and I'll speak to it. But it's closely related to our more recent initiative, which is reoptimizing for great power competition. And I say they're closely related. Our operational imperatives work has been very much focused on identifying discrete modernization projects, programs that are necessary for the Air Force to fulfill its missions and to accelerate them and to field them in a very rapid time frame. The reoptimizing for great power competition goes beyond just looking at modernization, right? Beyond just looking at acquisition programs, and really looks at the entire Department of the Air Force enterprise, all of our offices, all of our structures, to ask the question, is the structure that we have today fit for purpose for the missions assigned to the Department of the Air Force in the defense strategy, or are they perhaps still in a structure or in a shape or burdened by the legacy of previous strategies, previous national defense security focuses, for example, the wars of the Middle East and the global war on terror, and they do not align properly with today's mission and where we see the mission going in the future. And that part about the future is important. There's a lot of urgency. There's a lot of urgency of today, and that very much is driving action for the Department of the Air Force. But we also recognize that the competition part of the initiative is incredibly important, because the competition is not short-term, it's long-term. And of course, our hope is it will be a mostly peaceful, if not entirely peaceful, competition over a long period of time. And so we can't be exclusively focused on near-term threats, although we are focused on near-term threats. We also have to understand the longer-term shape of a strategic competition in which we're engaged and plan for that as well. So no simple task, but it's what we've undertaken with the Secretary and the Chief's reoptimization initiative. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the why. I have to preview that I'll leave you a little bit wanting, I hope, because the details of what is going to be part of the the initiatives for this reoptimizing for great power competition are actually things you're going to hear a lot more about at the Air Force Association event, which starts on Monday of next week, so stay tuned for that. If you're not going to be in Colorado for it, definitely tune in. You're going to hear a lot more about specific and discrete initiatives. But I definitely want to talk a little bit about the why and some of the problems that we're trying to solve. And then I also want to talk a little bit about how we think we can get after those problems using some examples of programs that many of you are probably already familiar with that have really been some of our guiding benchmarks to say, we know what right looks like, and the question is, how do we make sure that organizationally we're postured to do that repeatedly as a matter of routine rather than as an exception that somehow made its way through the system, even though the system was not designed to support it. So in terms of the problems that we're trying to solve, obviously I talked about the operational imperatives, right? Those are very much driven by discrete missions that the Air Force, I'll focus now mostly on my comments on the Air Force, but keeping in mind that we work very closely with the Space Force, that the Air Force has to be able to accomplish, and specific technical capabilities required to do that. Well, the nature of those technical capabilities is in some ways different from what we've had to be able to do in the past. Now, not entirely different, and in fact, you know, if you go back some decades when we were in a long-term, long-running strategic competition with an adversary, in that case the Cold War and the Soviet Union, we had to continuously generate new capabilities. It was a move, counter-move situation in terms of it being a strategic competition. You could never rest, you could never relax. The situation was always changing, and we had to have systems designed for that purpose. And I would argue, actually, although it has its flaws for sure, and it certainly has its critics, our defense acquisition system was largely designed in that environment, right? It was designed to engage in a strategic competition with a very competent, capable strategic competitor, not unlike the situation that we find ourselves in today. So what is the nature of that? Well, you see that a lot of the things that we have today, a lot of very complex systems that have to work in close coordination with one another, right? We have fleets of tanker aircraft that work in close coordination with a bomber force that has is supplied with weapons from our with working closely with industry, but with our weapons experts in the Air Force developing capabilities. And all of these things have to work in a very integrated fashion in order to be successful. Well, we were able to leverage that tremendous investment over the last 20 plus years to do very, I would say, very high precision and highly effective and highly impactful things like airstrikes around the world, but at very modest scale, and usually not at a something where you can leverage your intelligence resources and your other resources in a way that allow you to be very judicious and build up over a period of time, and then do what you want to do, and then you've done it, and you can kind of rebuild and reset. What we're looking at in terms of strategic competition is the necessity to do that same thing, but at a pace and a scale completely unlike anything we've done before. And that drives a huge necessity for integration between and among systems. Integration at a much higher degree than we've had in the past. Now, we talked about this quite a bit in the last year, because we stood up for the first time in the United States Air Force what we characterize as an integrating PEO. So our PEOs, our program executive officers, run our acquisition programs. And the way it typically works is they're assigned a program, and their job is to deliver that program. And there's kind of a network, right, a friend network amongst PEOs that they try to make sure that they're working together and they're leveraging each other's capabilities. But that's sort of something that happens on the side, or happens as a result of individuals and personalities. It's not something that we currently are postured necessarily to do systematically. In the Cold War, we did have structures, system centers, and systems commands that performed some of that integrating function. But most of that was was an efficiency that was efficiencyed away at the end of the Cold War. We need to be able to do that again, and even more so than we did during that previous period. So we created an integrating PEO as our first step and our pioneer, our pathfinder, to accomplish this task. And then our integrating PEO is General Luke Cropsey, and his mandate is for command, control, communications, battle management, C3BM. Right? This is the integration of command and control across essentially the entire force, certainly for the Department of the Air Force, but having to tie in, of course, to the entire joint force and ultimately with allies and partners as well. An incredibly complex task. In fact, something that Secretary Kendall, who knows a thing or two about assigning complex jobs to people, has said is the hardest job he's ever given anyone to do, is the job that he gave to General Cropsey to serve as the integrating PEO. That's an example of what I'm trying to talk about that we're driving towards, is the ability to do integration across our organizational stovepipes in the acquisition community, but also in the operational community across the department to a much higher degree, and doing it on purpose, not because the friend network enables it, but because our system enables it. So that's a huge part of what we need to accomplish, what we know we need to accomplish. A second thing that I really want to highlight is the need to take science and technology and turn that into fielded capability at a much more accelerated pace, right? You know, sort of go faster, turn the wheel faster, and that we see as well, because you know, the National Defense Strategy talks about a pacing threat, and as I always like to say, the pace of the pacing threat is really fast. So if that's our pacing threat, right, that's the pace that we have to meet. And so we have to be able to take technology from the S&T phase, and I would assert, because I believe it, that there's a very good S&T work happening within the Department of the Air Force, and particularly the Air Force Research Lab. There's also incredible S&T happening in the private sector and in the commercial sector, and there's abundant commercial investment that we can leverage for Department of the Air Force purposes. And the challenge is finding a way to make sure that we can take that work and integrate it and deliver it as fielded capability on a much faster pace. And again, rather than as something that happens occasionally, something that happens routinely and with very deliberate purpose. Now, the example that I would like to point to here, where I think we know what right looks like, is our program to deliver collaborative combat aircraft. Now, we had an initiative within the Air Force Research Laboratory that was called Skyborg, that was looking at how to apply artificial intelligence to uncrewed systems to allow them to be partners with crewed capability for the Department of the Air Force. That program has led directly into now an acquisition program called Collaborative Combat Aircraft that is to deliver a affordable capability that can partner with our crewed aircraft to do a wide variety of missions for the United States Air Force, to include strike and other traditional air combat missions. So that's a case where we have been able to take something directly that was happening at the Air Force Research Lab, transition it directly into a program of record, leveraging a lot of other foundational architectures, about which I'll say a little more in a minute, and get on a path to deliver capability and field a capability on a rapid time frame. That's what right looks like, and that's what we're looking to make a routine part of the way that we do business, and more to come, as I said, at AFA on how we think we can accomplish that goal. And then the third piece is we understand that in this as was true in the past, in this very challenging security environment, long-running strategic competition, we need our partners and allies more than ever. And so the things that we do, the way that we approach our problems, the partner and ally piece of it has to be integrated as early as possible, and ideally from the first moment on the front end. And in terms of what does right look like, we have been working assiduously with our closest partners and allies to integrate them as well. Certainly the AUKUS initiative is a highlight of this. Our collaborative combat program, we are working with multiple countries to have them as early adopters and early partners and enablers in that approach and in the iterations of that are yet to come. So that is another element of integration that is really critical in our overall impulse for needing to do reoptimizing for great power competition. So I want to talk a little bit now about how we see that we will likely do this. Not the specific initiatives, but more the nature of the kind of change that we think we need. I alluded earlier to the need to work with industry. So as has been pointed out many times by my mentors and predecessors like Dr. Carter and Mr. Kendall, the capabilities that we field, we understand industry is the critical partner, a critical partner in delivering those capabilities. We alone aren't going to be successful in fielding capability without substantial work and substantial investment from industry. That includes traditional defense industry, kind of what I would call emerging defense industry, those who've committed themselves to the defense sector and are hotly engaged in it now and are looking to grow their both their capability and their presence in our defense industry in our space. And then companies that are truly commercial maybe aren't looking to grow their defense space, but are certainly willing to do it if there's money to be made, and they have inherent capability that we can leverage and that we need. So I think we understand that industry ultimately is a critical source for the things that I described, right? Both the core capabilities that they've traditionally provided and the extensive integration and the expertise to do extensive integration that's required. And so we have to work in close partnership with industry to deliver these capabilities. And what do I mean by partnership, right? It's kind of a loaded term for those of you who've watched the acquisition space. Sometimes we maybe, it's popular to talk about industry as partners, and other times it's not popular to talk about industry as partners. We go through a cycle. So let me just be more specific, right? Because I'm trying to use partnership here in a fairly specific way. What we want to partner on is a series of architectures. Architectures that provide standards, interfaces, and ability to link things together. You can imagine, for example, the kinds of architectures and standards that we have for Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, right? Where industry gets together. It's not a conspiracy. It is it's a standard-setting process. It's a way of aligning the activities of different companies to the benefit of all, and most importantly to me, to the benefit of the Department of the Air Force and to the Department of Defense. To ensure that capabilities can be integrated in a logical way, in a relatively seamless way, and in a way where we don't have to reinvent the wheel 100 times over. And it's not a static thing, right? You don't pay once and you're done. It's a living thing, right? Standards and interfaces, we see the famous ones in the commercial world, right? They're being constantly evolved, constantly updated. Well, that suits our purpose exactly, right? Because we know we have to be able to constantly evolve our capabilities and constantly update them. So when I talk about partnership in industry, what I'm really talking about is partnering on a set of core architectures, Department of the Air Force architectures. Many of them could be Department of Defense architectures. I care most about the Air Force ones, that enable us to field that capability, field it quickly, integrate it, and then evolve it rapidly over time. And these core foundational architectures are the great enabler for that, and we cannot do it without a close partnership with industry. So let me give you an example, because I know I'm talking a little bit theoretically, and this architecture discussion is often very theoretical. But we have a pretty concrete example of one we've done, which we call AMS-GRI, the Advanced Mission Systems Government Reference Architecture. And this is an architecture that was developed to allow, if you will, plug and play for the different key electronic systems on an aircraft. That you could pull out, a guidance system, a box that's providing, navigation and guidance, plug in one from a different manufacturer, and it just works, right? We don't have to spend years and millions integrating a new box. It just plugs in, and it works. And so working closely with industry's active involvement, this Advanced Mission Systems Government Reference Architecture has been developed, and it works. And we're implementing it on multiple new build platforms. That's the pathfinder, right? That's the example of the kind of thing that we need to do and the partnership that we need to build with industry to do it. Now, we're going to continue to work with industry, through contracts and traditional mechanisms, and from time to time we have disputes with industry and you get into contract enforcement. All of that's still true, right? So I don't mean to use the word partner like it's all, we're going to hug it out every time, right? Those existing systems still exist, and our relationship with industry is still governed by them. But there's this key element of partnership that for sure we know we need and that we need to share. And we have been working with industry, and I'm pleased to say we've had a number of willing partners from industry, and I would argue that partnership is going well. Another area that we're pushing hard on with industry there is, in addition to the systems themselves and how they work together, it's how we design them, what we call digital material management. So the design of the weapon systems themselves, their software, the development of the software that goes in them, how they're built, how they're produced, digital thread from design to production, and ultimately to sustainment, how they're sustained, including in our depots or through contractor logistics support, that you have an integrated digital thread that touches all of those. That goes deep into areas in which industry has the vast majority of the expertise. It's also, as I've increasingly learned in working with industry on this, necessary for that to integrate with their core business systems, which they are obviously core to their business and not something the government necessarily either does or wants to control. And so we have to work closely with industry to set standards and interfaces for digital material management, and that's something that we're in the process of doing. And I think it's a major step forward on that. All of this comes together, really, the partnership, the programs, the architectures, ultimately comes back to money. You got to have the funding to pay for these things. It is not necessarily cheap or easy to develop a sophisticated government reference architecture for a really challenging thing like integrating complex defense systems. It's not necessarily cheap or easy to do such an architecture for weapons or to do such an architecture for C3BM. So we have to be willing and dedicated to making investments in those areas. And we have done that in the Department of the Air Force. Secretary Kendall, the chiefs, they have made investments in C3 battle management. And if and when we ever get an FY24 budget request, many of those investments will now, or an FY24 budget, we've had a request for quite some time, we will have the funding to execute those things. Now, we are advantaged. Some things were already ongoing under the 23 budget. We've been able to continue them under the continuing resolution. C3 battle management is to some extent an example of that. Collaborative combat aircraft is an example of that. What the 24 budget will do will be allow us to really accelerate our efforts, right? Go well beyond what was planned for 23. In all those areas, the Air Force planned critical investments to substantially accelerate our efforts, and that's what the 24 budget will allow us to do, is substantially accelerate our efforts on all of these things. So the most important, the most important message that I can deliver today, which is also the same message that the Air Force has been sending for some time, is that really nothing could be more important to us than getting a fiscal year 24 budget, so that we can really hit the accelerator on all of these initiatives and move them from the idea phase into the implementation phase and do it as fast as possible. So I thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to the conversation with Steve, and I'll turn to that now.
Thanks, Andrew. Join me, please. Excellent. That was as good an inaugural Arsenals of Democracy address as I could have hoped for. Thank you very much, Andrew. We have rebranded what we used to call more clumsily, I thought, the Defense Industrial Policy Series. So I think Arsenals of Democracy Address is a better brand, and that was a great launch to the series. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
We've got 40 minutes to do a couple of things. That was practically worth the event unto itself. But why don't we go a little deeper on some of the topics and extend beyond the range of some of what you talked about over the course of these 40 minutes. In the last 10 or 12 minutes, I will be very pleased to take questions from those of you who are here. In 10 or 12 minutes, when my colleague Jake signals, you could queue up at that microphone. But equally so, am I interested in receiving questions from those of you, the many of you who are watching online. And Clem made reference, but I will repeat the way to do that, which is, I made a note, askac.org. You can issue a question at askac.org, and the aforementioned Jake Mezzi will curate these for me, and I can enter those into the conversation as well. This is, it was said, an open on the record conversation, so even those of you asking questions, I would ask to identify yourself, and as it may be germane to your question, your affiliation, in order to get your question in front of Andrew. Let me pick right up where you left off, even if this ends up being a random sampler of things. As to the possibility, the dire possibility that we would end up in a full year continuing resolution, have you got a number on the dent, the dollar value of a dent that would put in your 24 acquisition plans?
I do, and it would set us back. It would be essentially a 13% reduction in our budget from what we had requested.
RDT&E and procurement.
The entire Department of
the entire department.
Right. But the impact would be focused on RDT&E procurement.
Right.
For the very good reason that Congress would undoubtedly, and has in fact passed a 24 National Defense Authorization Act that mandates a pay raise.
Yep.
So the pay raise has to happen. That's law.
That's going to.
So 13% less. Okay, now roll in. Pay is going up, but you're 13% less. So then it essentially magnifies the scope or the impact of that reduction. And let me just talk about that reduction because there's a couple different elements to it, right? One is our 24 request was higher than our 23 budget. Mm-hmm. So if we get a continuing resolution for 23, now you're at a lower number, right? So that's a reduction. Then you get this issue of the Congress put in this proviso that said, and if not all the appropriation bills are enacted, and if you have a continuing resolution, by definition, they are not all enacted, mm-hmm. At a certain point in April, that 23 number gets cut by 1%. So now you've got another 1% reduction. And then, as I said, there are a number of...
And that's real money in an Air Force budget, even 1%. We're talking $3 billion.
Correct. It's not a small budget, so it's real money. And then you have the effect that, as I said, certain accounts will inevitably off the table for cuts, and military pay being one of them. I would imagine some other benefits would also be the case. Certain priorities for the yep. department would be protected. So what you end up seeing is a double-digit % increase. And the reality is it would be not unlike sequestration, which was had a really devastating impact on the department. And some of those impacts we have still not yet recovered from.
Yeah, right.
When you look at our sustainment of our weapon systems, they have not yet fully recovered from the original sequestration, 2013,
right.
Decade ago. Mm-hmm. And if we do it again, the damage would be almost inconceivable to me.
We will get to some brighter things to talk about for sure, but you mentioned a couple of programs that because they already had started, you'd be able to continue, albeit at the 23 level of funding. Are there a couple of programs that you can't start without a full year appropriation?
Yeah, there are. I said I was going to talk too much about the Space Force because it's not in my job jar. But I'm really passionate about the need for those capabilities, because what I see on the Air Force side is I can't succeed unless the capabilities the Space Force is planning to deliver.
CQ battle management, there's going to be some satellites involved in that.
There's satellites involved in that, right? There's satellites involved in targeting. There's satellites involved in communications. There's satellites involved in navigation and yep. timing. So almost every capability that I'm working to deliver depends upon a space capability that's related. And those space capabilities, and we have them, right? But they're vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so a number of investments are planned and are part of our 24 budget to significantly improve the resiliency of our space architectures. I think again, not my job jar, but I think it's almost every single one of those is on hold until we get that 24 budget. And it's the reason why Congress and the President working together created a Space Force, is they saw the need for these capabilities right. and the need to accelerate their development and their fielding. We need to get after that. Okay.
Still working off of what you introduced to us, the answers to the why. I have a question. So I'd written down why number 1, pace and scale. Why number 2, more quickly turning advanced technology, science and technology investments into programs, leveraging partners. and then your discussion about industry. Drawing on the aforementioned experience that you have had in this trade, going back to the Obama administration, is the acquisition management system, everything from practices to regulation and law, is that the toolbox you need to deliver against these 4 things that we just mentioned, or do we also need to, period? Is it a good enough toolbox?
So we're adding tools to our toolbox, and I want to talk a little bit about those. Some of them are statutory, and I definitely want to talk about that.
Okay.
But let me start just on the things that we can do within the existing statute. So, and within the existing process. And we have a lot of support, by the way, a lot of support from Congress to do the right thing, a lot of support from senior leadership in the department, Dr. LaPlante, who kind of owns the acquisition policy, a lot of support to go do the right thing and to help us enable us to do the things we need to do. So I would say my broad answer to your question is, yes, we have what we need, but we still need new tools because there are discrete problems we need better tools to solve, and I think there's some new approaches. So when I talked about that partnering with industry, right, on these foundational architectures, right, you know, the architecture itself is a tool, right, and now you could argue we've had those in the past, right? Link 16 is an example of, I think, a highly architected system that has stood up for a number of decades because of that. Not without its challenges, but it's been
not truly plug and play.
It's been a success.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's necessary, but not sufficient. Right. We've got to be able to work with industry in a way. And again, so I would point to our approach to collaborative combat aircraft. Right. We have talked in recent weeks about the fact that we're working with 5 different vendors on the early stages of the collaborative combat aircraft. Well, you know, in a classic program of the past, right, we would have already narrowed down probably to 2, and regrettably in some cases 1,
right, even
at this early stage of a program, in part to save money, in part because of complexity, and that it just means there's only so many people who can do the job, and in part because it's hard to maintain competition for a long period of time. Big demand signal on the government, big requirement for the government to have expertise at the table evaluating and working with a wide variety of industry partners. But we're trying to take what I call a next-gen approach, which is to
a next-gen process approach,
or
to a next-gen
approach.
engineering model.
Yeah, we've drawn a little bit of fire because we've named so many of our programs, you know, Next-Gen X, right? Like, when is the Air Force ever going to come up with a new name, right? But there's something to it, right? So you think of this next-gen approach, next-gen air dominance, next-gen air refueling system. Aside from the fact that NGAS is a really great acronym for a tanker airplane, the next gen means something, right? It means something about our approach to the problem, that we do not want to skinny down the space of suppliers to 1 or 2 and then rely on them to give us everything we need. All right, we want to open the aperture. We want to have mission systems providers deeply engaged directly with the Air Force from the get-go and continuously throughout the program, and not get to a point where it's just one prime working with us, and everything is, you know, is that duopoly, if you will, transaction between the 2. So that's that next-gen model. And in order to really succeed with these architectures, you've got to have a next-gen model that says, now I've got a bunch of vendors, because what's the use of an architecture when there's only one company building to it, right? Well, then it's just their architecture. It's not our architecture. So our approach is really enabled by, again, what I call this next-gen approach. Wide variety of vendors, traditional vendors, non-traditional vendors, new entrants, and then continuous competition throughout a program life cycle.
Do you need, you alluded to the fact that in the past, one of the reasons, a dominant reason, why we haven't kept more competitors in the development of programs is money. Is the reason we're able to do this, let's say on CCA, because we have more money, or is there something about either the technologies, the marketplace, or the processes that we're using that allow us to do this and not simply pile more money early in the program?
Well, I'd like to say we have more money, but we don't.
I suspected that was not the answer, which is why I asked.
So what does that mean? That means you have to prioritize something like an architecture. That means you have to persuade, you know, generals in the Air Force and a secretary, and ultimately congressmen, senators, staffers, that investing in architecture is a good use of money, even when you start talking about tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And they say, well, I could get an F-35 for that. And you're just giving me an architecture, right? Like, what does an architecture do for me? Well, I think we can answer that question. I've tried to answer that question. In the right setting, you could answer it even more fulsomely, but it does give you something. But it does require a commitment within the organization to really put resources against that. And it requires a commitment on the part of industry, and I'm mindful of that, right? We've asked industry to pitch in with us, put their own money into helping us develop these architectures.
Well, that was one of the changes I was wondering if you were going to invoke, yeah.
And several of them have. Several of them have been willing to do that. And like I said, you've got some new folks coming in who say, hey, this architecture approach really matches my business model, so there's an advantage to me, so I'm willing to invest in that. So I think, yes, to your answer, it does take money, and we don't have new money, so we are having to make that a priority, and we've done that, right? We've done that with our next generation air dominance family of system, which includes collaborative combat aircraft.
Yep.
We're doing that with C-3BM. And we've been getting support from Capitol Hill, provided we can get a bill.
Let me stick with industry for a second. I'll ask a broad question. You can answer it any way you'd like, narrowly or otherwise. From your seat as the acquisition executive of the Air Force, I like your phrase, what does right look like? What does right look like in our industry right now? And then conversely, offer a couple of, let's call them challenges, as opposed to what wrong looks like. Just think about the industry, no one contractor, but the industry as a resource to solve and realize these ambitions you have. What are the strong muscles you see out there, and what are the muscles that need some further development in industry?
Well, let me talk, circle back. It might be a little bit weird. It is a passion project on digital material management.
Yep.
Right, which ultimately is the foundation for delivering military capability in the future, I believe, right? And you see it happening, right? The digital thread is being adopted in all industries all over the place, right? Tesla and SpaceX and a number of companies have really gone all in on that, a number of like traditional car manufacturers. So we see the benefits of it in other industrial endeavors. We certainly see the benefit of it in defense. I think the benefit is actually even greater for us because of the complexity and the degree of integration required for military systems, which I would argue is beyond what's typically required for commercial systems. So I think there's even more advantage for us. And so with digital material management, again, it's a huge investment on the part of industry because it's not just what they do for us, it's how they do their own business internal to the company.
Sure.
At every stage, how they do inventory management, how their engineers work, the tools that they use, how their business systems operate, how accounting is done. At every level, right? This is all part of essentially one digital thread that has to work together. Now, it doesn't all have to be, it's not one ring to rule them all, right? In fact, that's central to the vision is there are multiple tools. The best tools, and there's more than one of them, in the commercial sector for doing digital design, for doing business enterprise systems, for doing inventory control and management. There's a wide variety of commercial tools out there, and it's never going to be the case that every company is going to just pick one. And the different companies aren't all going to pick the same one. And the companies all have to work together as part of an integrated supply chain, and they all work for each other. So, the vision has to encompass the ability to take the best state-of-the-art commercial tools and have them work together, and then purpose-built tools for defense purposes that work with the commercial tools and that work with together, and it's tools plural. And it has to be able to come together. And so that's something we could never do on our own. We have to work with industry on that. Industry has to be willing to invest for that to be true. Now, we've been on a journey with industry, I would say, over the last maybe 10 years on how do we realize that, right? Start small, we're kind of growing it. I would say, I think of digital material management as the full realization of the vision, but someone will replace me and maybe they'll have an even bigger vision. So, and I should say, it's not just my vision, right? My military partner, General Duke Richardson, this is a vision from Air Force Materiel Command and from the Secretariat to do this together with industry.
I'm hearing that, though, on the needs development challenge side of the ledger as opposed to great strong muscle.
But I think what right looks like is we've got a suite of very powerful commercial tools that we can and are adopting. We've got industry investing. We've got Air Force and other services, by the way. We're also working with Army and Navy on this. And Dr. LaPlante is highly engaged on the topic as well.
Right.
And he has literal experience on digital engineering himself. We are working closely together on this. So I'm going to say that's what right looks like. We're not there yet.
Okay.
But we've got a lot more digital thread today than we did 5 years ago.
Right, but I'm also hearing that if you in the defense industry, whomever you may be, at whatever tier of the industry you are, don't aim to and quickly get up to the world-class standard of digital design, you're going to fall behind. You're not going to be able to answer what at least the Air Force needs from our companies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you wanted me to get to the critique part?
I'm sorry?
You wanted me to get to the critique part?
Oh, I thought that was the critique part. Yeah, lay it on us.
Well, so I mean, what are the challenges, right? I don't think I'm going to shock you out of your chair here, but we've seen real gaps and deficiencies. The supply chain disruption that came about as a result of COVID, first of all, in of itself is a problem, right? Mm-hmm. But it also illustrated the fact that there's a deeper problem, right? Yeah. Which is we don't have a robust enough industrial base, especially in certain very specific key capabilities. We are down to one or, in the worst case, of course, zero. In many cases, one.
And by capability, you mean companies?
Yeah, I mean, the ability to generate, a solid rocket motor of a specific type that we need. Mm-hmm. The ability to generate specific kinds of sophisticated electronics that we need.
Yep.
Again, sometimes we're at zero, sometimes we're at one, far too often. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're at two, but very unhealthy. And we can't surge, right? So it's weaknesses in the supply chain, weaknesses in the industrial base, and a lack of ability to surge. And in effect, what COVID did, right, was it created a surge to which the system could not respond.
Well, that compounded by, at least with respect to certain weapons, the war in Ukraine.
Yes,
converging to really test the system.
Right, parallel shocks to the system that both show that we've got serious deficiencies in those areas. Now, I do think that the approach that I'm describing is meant to help solve those problems. Doesn't solve them overnight, right? But by having a wider pool of vendors, more continuous competition, I think we can substantially improve the health of the industrial base long term. Short term, we're just going to have to go work some of these problems one by one by one.
So this brings me around to one of the other things I had wanted to ask you about, and that is the National Defense Industrial Strategy that was promulgated by OSD about a month ago now, and which I think it's fair to say begged a lot of questions about how it was going to address in more practical form rather than rhetorical form the deficiencies of the sort that you're repeating, which are also enunciated in that document. Right? So at least within the scheme of the Air Force, what are we going to do? Are we going to capitalize companies that don't exist? Are we going to create incentives for prime contractors to motivate them? What does the Air Force do more practically than is expressed in that strategy to fill these gaps or address these gaps?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest changes, I would say, from having a national defense industrial strategy is I can sit at this table with you and say, we have a national defense industrial strategy.
Which is worth reading, but make no mistake.
And you know very well, as having once been responsible for industrial policy in the Department of Defense, that we have a government that is a little bit allergic to the idea of industrial policy.
Indeed.
My own belief is you have an industrial policy whether you know it or not, or whether you're willing to admit it or not. But you don't necessarily have a good industrial policy. You don't necessarily have an industrial policy that makes sense. You don't necessarily have an industrial policy that is consistent across multiple departments of the government, or even multiple PEOs.
Sure.
Right? So whenever someone, I'm sorry, this is a little bit of a digression, but if someone comes to me and says, how do I do business with the Department of Defense? Who do I talk to? Who actually buys things? I'm like, well, theoretically, I buy things. But the reality, of course, is you need to go to see this PEO, this PEO, this PEO, or go talk to my friend Doug Bush and see his PEOs, or there's hundreds of buying entities, right? And in theory, and I'm afraid far too often in practice, right? We may have had hundreds of industrial-based strategies across the Department of Defense in the past. So,
and no touchstones.
Now, I'm not saying we've arrived at nirvana and we can say that we have one industrial-based strategy and everyone's following it, but that's the desire, right? We want to go to and they're not all going to be identical, but we want to go to a place where there is some consistency across the department and how we approach these things. Now, I would argue that we're doing that in some of what I've already described, right?
Yep.
Working with the Army and the Navy on see-through battle management architectures, on digital material management architectures, which we are doing. Working with, in particular, I'd say closely with the Navy on AMS GRA, the Advanced Mission Systems Government Reference Architecture, so that from industry, they don't just say like, okay, I got to do it this way for the Air Force, and then a different way for the Navy, and then a different way for the Army, and maybe an entirely different way for the Marine Corps, right? It's, so I think a big part of it is we are coming together. We are coalescing to a more common approach. There is work to be done in, in doing an implementation plan and to say, okay, what are the discrete investments, right? What are those one by ones?
Right.
Some of them we already know because there's already money in the budget that we've asked Congress for. Congress almost always comes through on these industrial base when you give them a discrete, obvious challenge.
Right.
They don't give us undefined pots of money, you know that too.
Right.
But when we can give them a very discrete thing, they're often very supportive of it.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to do more work to identify the additional one by ones that have started to emerge. Many of them, the microelectronics area, castings and forgings, the batteries, right? A lot of these are somewhat known. So still work to be done there. But we also, I think, have to remember the bigger picture piece, which to me comes across in the section there they talk about flexible acquisition, right? I think that gets after what I'm talking about, a next-gen style approach. And what I was saying when we said we need new tools, we need these next-gen tools. We can do them under our current statutes and our current policy, but that doesn't mean we know how to do them, right? I think increasing the Air Force, we think we do. And we can then write policy to make it so that everyone can do it that way as well.
Right. But on balance, harkening back, unfortunately, perhaps to that very first question, we don't need a lot of law and new regulation to realize this vision. We need to change some of our practices. We need to propagate best cases, et cetera. Am I hearing you right?
Well, yes, with one exception. We're very excited that the Congress gave us what we're calling quick start authority in the FY24 NDAA. And this is something Secretary Kendall's been advocating for. Actually, he's said multiple times now he's been advocating for it for decades. But we included a request with our fiscal year 24 legislative proposal specifically. And it leverages, it's very similar to existing Rapid Acquisition Authority.
Okay.
But when you drill down in the details of our existing DoD Rapid Acquisition Authority, it's very much focused on COCOM requirements, which is not a bad thing. I used to run the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell for OSD. I was all about meeting COCOM requirements. I firmly believe in it. It's a wonderful thing. It's a necessary thing. But what we didn't have was something for the services to say, hey, I've got something that's really important that I need to get after as soon as possible, not because people are dying, in the near term, but because I have no time to lose.
Right.
And so we said we'd like to get something that looks a lot like Rapid Acquisition Authority that can be done at the for service level.
Right. Doesn't have to be validated out in the field.
And the Congress was kind enough to provide us. So we are working quite a bit now to come up with what are the first really great ideas that we can bring to the table for that authority, and stay tuned for that.
Okay. I get maybe 7 more minutes, and then we're going to take questions from the audience, and I've got a lot to squeeze in there, so we'll go a little bit lightning round, unless you want to expand on the very first question, because it's quite important, I think. So yesterday, there was a bit of a blockbuster announcement from Doug Bush's office about the Army's decision to cancel its armed reconnaissance helicopter. There may have been a bunch of reasons, but one of them, at least the way I read it, was lessons learned from Ukraine. My simple question to you is, while it's not a big air war by any means in Ukraine, are there important things that the Air Force is learning from Ukraine that are going to turn up, some aspect of those learnings are going to turn up in Air Force acquisition, changes to Air Force acquisition?
I think of it, I take an acquisition lens to it, right?
Yeah.
I think there's tons of lessons from Ukraine, and many of them are operational, and it's not my area of expertise. But
fair, right.
And I guess I mean, to be fair, I think what I'm going to say in broad brush is the lessons learned are things we kind of already knew, but they really have been brought home. So one thing we knew was dominance of the air is really important, and it's really hard, and you may not have it when you need it. And that's just true, right? And that's true going forward. Right? It's going to be increasingly challenging to obtain air dominance, and it's not always going to be achievable. And the consequences of not having it are exactly what we see happening in Ukraine.
Right. Neither of them can
Neither
dominate.
have ever at any point been able to achieve it.
Neither of those two countries.
Second thing is the importance of electronic warfare and the pace at which it moves. Again, that's something we knew, but it's been very vividly demonstrated, and it's kind of is that wake-up call, right? Because we hadn't had to do an electronic warfare war in recent times. And we did some extent with IEDs, but this is a different scale and intensity and sophistication.
Right.
And then and the last thing is just the challenge of ramping and surging production, right? We did sort of understand that, but it's really been brought home.
Yeah. Okay. True lightning round here. I just want to knock down your big acquisition programs. Any color commentary you might give us on them. Let me just start with, as it were, torn from the headlines, B-21. Seems like the aircraft is developing well. Northrop Grumman had an earnings call recently, made known that they're going to have to absorb more cost than they had planned to in LRIP. Any other color commentary on B-21, but more specifically, do you worry about your prime contractors who have signed, and they're not the only ones, Boeing's eating a lot of cost on the KC-46, of course. To what degree does the Air Force acquisition executive concern him or herself with that?
So on B-21, right, program is executing, from my perspective, very well. We're very excited to be in flight test. We are excited to be on track in terms of cost and schedule for the program, according to our baseline, which is my agreement with my program manager.
Right.
This is what you're expected to deliver, on track. And coming, like I say, executing fairly well.
Right.
On the very well. On the topic of kind of what happens with industry, right, when they have losses on. I do care, absolutely, I do care, because as I mentioned at the front end, right, without industry's capabilities, we're never going to get to where we have to go. So we want our industry partners to be there for us in the long run, and we do not want to undermine their long run viability by the way in which we approach programs. When I talked about kind of that next gen approach, there's an element of that, right? I talk about continuous competition. So if what do you see the dynamics of the past, right? The dynamics of the past are, if you lose a competition, you've just lost 30 years of business, so you go all in to win that next 30 years of business.
Certain behaviors.
Then you find yourself in a situation where you bid very aggressively,
right?
And now maybe you're taking losses, certainly in early production lots, on a program that so it's a super high stakes environment, right? Kind of the traditional way. One of the benefits of the next gen approach is it's a much lower stakes, right? Because you're not losing 30 years of business in any individual competition. You don't have to bid aggressively or nearly as aggressively. We hope people will still bid aggressively, but but they don't have to bid super aggressively because they're worried they're going to lose multiple decades of business, because that next competition is just around the corner in every case. So that's my approach.
You're not, therefore, even in CCA, I don't know if you can say, eschewing fixed price contracting.
We are not.
You're not.
We need it. Fixed price contracting has been a tool in defense acquisition from day one. It is the way commercial industry does it all the time, everywhere. There's nothing wrong with fixed price contracts, right? But if we set up structures where we incentivize people to do things that they later regret,
generational bet,
and then we regret, that's not good, and we don't want to do that.
Okay.
But we are going to enforce our contracts.
I'm sorry. Yes. Speaking of KC-46, is there anything you can say that's not pre-decisional about what would it be, the so-called bridge tanker KC-135, next gen, your next gen tanker, actually, right?
Well,
anything you'd like to say about that?
There's so much goodness in the tanker world, Steve.
We hardly have time. Is that what you're saying?
The quick version, so we are very focused on a next gen tanker, next gen aerial fueling system. It's important because the security environment, the threat to the tanker force is real and it's growing, and we recognize that we need a different approach as a result of that. So next-gen air refueling is the destination. That's where we need to go. I always like to say, if you know where you're trying to go, it's a lot easier to figure out how to get there. That's where we're trying to go. There is a gap between when we can reasonably expect a field, we think, and gas, next-gen air refueling system, and when we will complete the existing contract for KC-46. And so that's where this idea of like a bridge comes in. So I can't announce to you today what our strategy, our acquisition strategy is.
But you spend time
for
on
a bridge, but we're working hard on it. We know where we want to go, and what we're trying to do is have a path that gets us there.
Okay, maybe we will watch the space of the FY25 budget request. I'll tell you what, I don't want to infringe any more than I probably already have on the opportunity for those of you who have come to ask questions. Those of you in the audience who want to ask questions should stand at that microphone. That's how I'll know that you, oh, excellent. In the meantime, while they are assembling, let me pull a good question here from online. Scott Van Buskirk, retired Admiral Scott Van Buskirk, wants to know, how is the Air Force addressing this growing a drone threat and sophistication, or for that matter, even is that an Air Force mission, counter unmanned aerial vehicles? What's up there? That's obviously big in the news these days.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of discussion about whose mission is it. I think the reality is it's everyone's mission.
Okay.
The nature and the scale of the threat is such that there's plenty of need for counter UAS across all of the services and multiple regimes and domains. But having said that, we want to do things in an integrated way. So it may well make sense for someone to take on, like an executive agent role or a lead service role on counter UAS. I think still work to be done to define the parameters of what that will look like. But the U.S. Air Force is engaged. I think the Army is deeply engaged. And the Navy brings a lot of game to it as well. So, the biggest thing that obviously stands out about counter UAS is not getting on the wrong side of a cost trade, where you're spending, you're sending a multi-million-dollar missile to shoot down a $20,000 drone, and so you need a variety of techniques and systems. So that you can kind of match, weapon target pair, to use Air Force terminology. And so it's all in, right? Everyone needs to come to the table.
Okay. Identify yourself, please.
Robbie Smoncheroy with Cerberus Capital Management. So, Secretary Hunter, so you've eloquently laid out, if you will, the partnerships in the national security innovation base between government, industry, and even academia on the S&T front. But over the last decade, there's really been the growing emergence of the private capital sector. And the Air Force has really been working through AFWorks with the venture world. But where does you see the private equity world come in, especially when you're dealing with challenges like production, and really scalability, where billions in the private equity world can come to bear and really foster and support the industrial-based supply chain?
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a number of companies that are VC-backed that are entered the defense space. They've explicitly targeted the defense space. That's the business they want to be in. It's not just ancillary to their other, true business. It's core. And I think that's good. It's very positive. We welcome it. I would say one characteristic of these VC-backed companies is they're very comfortable with fixed-price contracting. In many cases, they don't want to take on the infrastructure required to do cost-based contract accounting, and therefore they like fixed-price. So that's one reason why we're not getting rid of fixed-price contracts.
Right.
That we need them. They're a very valuable tool. And I would point in particular, right? I don't have any favorites. I never do in industry, but I would just point out that Anduril, who's a big VC-backed company, is one of the vendors on the CCA, the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program. That is a program that is about producing aircraft. It's not a demo. It's not a maybe we're going to produce something. The Secretary of the Air Force has given us distinct and direct inventory objectives and timelines to get there. And so now, obviously, it's a competition. Anduril may or may not end up moving to production of a system, but it's not theoretical that a VC-backed company could be engaged on a major production program.
What about, if I may, though, the broad-shouldered private equity firms that are investing in taking companies private, investing in mature companies? Do they have a place in your, are you interested in that capital getting in this sector as well?
Well, they're in it, right?
Indeed,
There's a
indeed.
huge number of defense companies that are private equity owned. I think it can be a good thing. You know, a deep-pocketed private equity entity, you know, can provide that base of stability that most of our defense companies need to work with us long term. So it can be a positive thing. It can turn negative if you get a private equity investor who's just looking to, you know, make a lot of cash real quick and then exit real quick.
Right.
That's not the kind of private equity investment I would prefer.
Right. Okay, there is a question here that takes us back to Ukrainian F-16s. This is from Colby Badwar with The Insider. Undersecretary LaPlante has said that the U.S. is leading sustainment for Ukrainian F-16s. Can you talk about those munition sustainment requirements and the degree to which the Air Force is getting, you know, again, if we could get a supplemental, an emergency supplemental that the Air Force is poised to respond to?
Yeah, sustainment's a huge priority for us. Again, we're going to have a lot more to say about readiness and its importance and what we think we need to do to up our game next week. It's a huge priority. We have to invest in it, right? There's definitely a money challenge there. There's also a process challenge, right? About how do we identify, or how do we give our system explicit direction and guidance, prioritization to say what really makes a difference. You know, is 5% more aircraft availability of A-10s what makes the difference in our future fight? I would argue it's not.
Are we going to do this? Is the U.S. Air Force going to do the sustainment for the Ukrainian F-16s?
Yes, that is a role that the United States agreed to, and our program office that manages F-16s will be the enabler.
Perfect.
And our depots.
Please identify yourself and welcome.
Thank you so much. Charles Sills, Defense Leadership Forum. Speaking to theater acquisition, can you tell us, with regard to all the Air Force bases, many of them reaching back to World War II on dispersed islands that are now being rejuvenated and refacilitated, can you say whether AFCEC is going to be working with the Army Corps of Engineers or NAFAC or both of those with the construction and the MILCON side of that?
Well, there is a lot of work to be done to, to have the infrastructure in place in the parts of the world we know we need to be prepared to operate to support our concept of operations. The term of art that we use a lot is Agile Combat Employment, ACE. And the idea is you don't be too tied to any one set of hangars and runways that can be easily targeted by a potential adversary, that you're out of the game because you just can't get off the ground. And so it's a more distributed approach. The agile part of it is really challenging, but it definitely creates a demand signal, not just for infrastructure investment, of which it does. And as you've noted, right, there are some recently announced projects to revamp airfields that have been in the Pacific in the past and have been out of use. But it also creates a demand signal for support equipment, for fuel infrastructure, for the tools that allow us to turn aircraft around and to provide them with fuel, provide them with weapons. There's a huge investment there, and that's an investment that when we get a 24 budget, we will be able to make substantial progress on.
Thank you. Let's take the next question at that microphone right there, please.
So Greg Sanders, CSIS. Thank you for speech.
From where?
CSIS.
Get close to the microphone, please.
Okay. So, and a question about government reference architectures and the collaborative combat aircraft. Could you elaborate on what you've been doing to bring in allies and partners and cooperation there? And to flip that question, are there steps, you've mentioned industry investments, are there steps that our allies and partners can take to better participate, try to win future on-ramps and the like? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. I talk about these government reference architectures. It can sound like, somewhere there's a set of like blue paper with, with lines and drawings on it. No, it's much more concrete than that. In fact, it's mostly software based. And so we have, and we will share the necessary tools and the necessary code with partners and allies for them to participate actively in developing to and implementing these architectures in their own systems, right? So they don't necessarily have to come by through FMS, a U.S. system. They can architect their own system to match the architecture. It's the nature of the global defense industry that a lot of it resides in the United States. Inevitably, the vast majority of them are going to acquire capability from U.S. firms as part of their architecture. But they can design to their own needs. They can also design things that we can adopt, and we can adopt it pretty seamlessly if it's designed to our architecture. So that's the beauty of this. That's how it enables not just interoperability, but a whole range of advanced collaborations between partners and allies, and it's a critical piece of our strategy.
Okay. For those of you watching online, we got a little bit of a late start. For that matter, for those of you here, I'm going to run over a couple, 3 minutes in order to take 2 more questions before we wrap. Please.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Raghubir Goyal. I'm with the member of the press with the Asia Today. I cover the Pentagon also. My quick question is, in the last 2 weeks, China was in the news on the Capitol Hill and among the industries here. My question is that how can you convince Congress as far as Chinese activities are concerned in the U.S. defense priorities, and as far as you go to for new acquisition and all that? And finally, if any of the U.S. Department or industries, defense industries are using any made-in-China parts?
Well, let me just get the last piece first.
Yeah.
It does happen from time to time. China is a manufacturing powerhouse in the world, and therefore there's a lot of especially as you get down to the lower level parts and components that are produced in China, and it can be challenging from time to time to keep all of that out of our supply chains. But by and large, we are not looking for content from China. And we work actively to keep it out of our supply chains. Our efforts are not perfect. It does happen from time to time. But our intent, and where we find that, we take it out. On the question of is it hard, or is it, what is it like working with Congress and articulating the China challenge? It is not hard. I would say the vast majority of members of Congress are at least as focused on the China challenge as the Department of Defense is. There's a lot of folks in the Department of Defense. Some are more focused than others. The Secretary of the Air Force is notoriously focused on that challenge. It'd be hard to surpass him for focus, but impossible in fact. But nonetheless, I find that Congress is very aware of the challenge, and we're working well with them in clarifying that. Having said that, it has to be said. The resource levels that the nation is willing to allocate to national defense need to reflect that understanding. And if we're under the levels of funding from the Financial Responsibility Act, I see a disconnect.
Thank you. We'll take one last question, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Secretary Hunter. My name is Samuel Chen. I'm the Vice President of the George Washington Union's Alexander Hamilton Society chapter. You mentioned a few programs, B-21, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to ask a very quick question about the E-7 wedge-tail program. I noticed that the U.S. Air Force has decided not to replace one-for-one the E-3 Sentry and decided to go for, I believe, 26 airframes last time I checked. Does this have to do with the F-35's increased ISR capabilities and perhaps more acquisitions for GMT satellites I know that the Space Force is working on? From your perspective on the acquisition side, did it make more sense to acquire an off-the-shelf solution to the E-3, which would be the E-7, or are we going to be considering more options for an increased, an AWACS aircraft with more increased effectiveness? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, by the way, this is an excellent question. I'll try to give an answer that matches the sophistication of the question. So a couple of things. One is you're correct, right? We're definitely moving away from the idea of one-for-one replacements. And that's true for all things. And it's also true for E-7 and E-3 AWACS. So yes, we are trying hard to look at all of the capabilities across the joint force, what they bring to the table, and then not go buy something just because, hey, we need the same number of the new thing that we had of the old thing, but what is the number we actually need given the capabilities of the joint force? So there is a difference in number between the E-7 and the E-3. The exact The exact difference in total number is still to be determined ultimately, right? The way acquisition programs work. We have committed and we are engaged in a rapid prototyping program for E7, which is 2 aircraft, and we've talked about production quantities that we anticipate needing. But as of now, what we're uncontracted for is for that prototyping program. I do expect a production program as well. And the capabilities of the E7 are such that you wouldn't need one for one even if you were just comparing E7 and E3. We think you can cover things more adequately at a different number. Having said that, we're wary of the dynamics of small fleets, which can be really challenging for sustainment and just inherently make operational challenges because you don't have very many. So there is a floor, if you will, of knowing you've got to build at least a certain number to have a real viable capability. So we're looking for that. And yes, in your question, you referenced that F-35, their space capabilities, those are things that have what, as I like to say, have game in the sensing and command and control space, and that is definitely part of the mix.
Thank you. That excellent question and thorough answer is a good place to end. I'm going to thank you, and then I'm going to give you the last word. My ambition, longstanding now for that matter, for this series is to improve the public conversation about issues that are arising at the intersection of, as I like to say, ministries and industry, but also to give the public a sense of who these policymakers are as people, how they think, what their temperament is, what they are willing to talk about, the depth at which they're able to answer questions, or sometimes the shallowness with which they have to resort to. And this event could not have met those standards more perfectly. We learned a lot. I think we have improved the already good public conversation about Air Force acquisition, and we learned more than even I, who's known Andrew for a while, knew about the temperament and the brain of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. So thank you, Andrew. A final word?
Well, I just want to talk a little bit about the people that we have in Air Force acquisition, because they talk process, you can talk, all the technical stuff, and you can tend to gloss over the people. We have amazing professionals in Air Force acquisition. They blow my mind on a daily basis, and it's a tremendous honor to work for them and to lead them. We are going to talk about areas where we need more technical expertise in our force, and we're going to get it. We're going to develop it, we're going to nurture it, and we're going to make that happen. We can see that we need that, but that isn't in no way meant to suggest that the existing workforce isn't exemplary, because they really are. The technical expertise. When I came into the job, I wondered if I was going to have a lot of work to do to get to more modern software development approaches. And I came in the door and I found that eye-watering work was already underway and was being done. It was being led by Air Force professionals. Yeah. Now, having said that, we have it in pockets that are incredible. There are other parts of the system that probably aren't at the same stage of advancement, and so we're also going to make sure that we spread that goodness from our Pathfinder organizations out to the rest of the enterprise. But I couldn't be more pleased with the quality of the folks that you have working for you in your Air Force doing acquisition.
Yeah, that's worth saying and shouldn't ever be taken for granted. All right, Andrew, thank you very much.